This is Lesson 882, Latin American Revolutions. Essential question: what were the main causes and effects of Latin American revolutions? Well, as we know, from 1500 to 1800, Latin America was colonized by Europe, especially Spain. European nations used mercantilism to gain wealth from their American colonies. So let's just quickly take another stab just to explain what this complicated idea of mercantilism is. And we've got that old chart right there to kind of sum it up for us. But don't forget, mercantilism is a form of economic warfare practiced by powerful manufacturing countries in Europe. It is the process of increasing your country's wealth and security by amassing stockpiles of gold in your country. How does gold make your country more secure? Gold can be used to buy weapons and build warships and train and pay soldiers. You can amass more gold in your country by increasing the value of your exports and decreasing the value of your imports. And that way, more gold comes into the country from what you sell than leaves the country from what you buy. A country's colonies play an important role in mercantilism because you can control what those colonies sell to you and what they buy from you. And you can forbid those colonies from doing business with any other countries. If you deliberately import cheap raw materials from your colonies and export expensive manufactured goods to your colonies, then you are practicing mercantilism. For example, buying cheap lumber from your colonies and paying your own people to turn that cheap lumber into expensive, fine furniture, which you then sell back to the colonies for big money, or importing cheap raw cotton and exotic furs from the colonies and selling them back to them as fine, expensive clothes, or importing cheap raw tobacco from the colonies and selling it back to them as fancy, expensive snuff. Some countries practice mercantilism very successfully, such as France and England. Some did it very poorly, like Spain. The key to doing it successfully was by attracting, valuing, and supporting a large population of merchants and a large population of artisans, that is, skilled craftspeople. They are the people who are doing the skilled work of processing those cheap raw materials into expensive manufactured goods. And they are the ones making the transactions and doing all of the shipping that's involved in moving these goods around. Mercantilism is a form of economic exploitation. It made the home country richer at the expense of its colonies. As we saw with the American Revolution, and will see with these Latin American revolutions, colonies eventually came to resent being taken advantage of by their mother countries through mercantilism. Also, Catholic missionaries from Spain and France converted lots of Native Americans. One major impact of European colonization was the unequal social hierarchy in Latin America, and we can see that on this pie chart here, and let's just break down a few categories. White Europeans were at the top of society. The Peninsulares were royal governors sent by the king to enforce mercantilism and maintain order in the colony. Full-blooded Europeans who had been born in the colonies were called Creoles. They had land, wealth, and education, but no political power. The Peninsulares had all of that. The lack of European women in these colonies led to many mixed-race marriages, and large mixed-race populations emerged that made up the next level of the social hierarchy. For example, the mestizos were the offspring of Europeans and Native Americans. The mulattoes were the offspring of Europeans and Africans. Indians, which was the term that they used for Native Americans at the time, and African slaves made up the bottom of the social hierarchy. Indians and slaves were used as workers for Creoles' plantations. By the late 1700s, Latin Americans had begun to be inspired to gain independence because of the success of the American and French revolutions. The ideas of the Enlightenment also inspired independence, especially among that well-educated Creole class. Haiti was the first Latin American colony to free itself from European rule. Haiti was a French colony with 500,000 African slaves working on sugar and coffee plantations. Plantation owners used brutal methods to control these slaves. In 1791, Haitian slaves rose in revolt. Toussaint Louverture became the leader of the slave uprising and helped free all the slaves by 1801. And this was a remarkable achievement because it was the only successful slave revolt ever in all of history. From 1802 to 1804, Haitians fought for their independence against Napoleon's French army. In 1804, France finally granted Haiti its independence, and Haiti became a free republic. From 1800 to 1830, Latin American colonies began declaring independence from European nations and establishing democracies throughout the Americas. Quick class discussion. Which social group will lead these Latin American revolutions, and why? And where did they get the idea to revolt and create democracies? And the answer to that first question really depends on where you are. For example, in Haiti, it was African slaves that led the revolts. In South America, it was the Creoles. And in Mexico, it was the Native Americans, the Indians. Throughout the Spanish colonies in South America, the Creoles had wealth and education, but could not participate in government. But Creoles embraced Enlightenment ideas like natural rights and consent of the governed, which we've already learned about. In 1810, the demand by Creoles for political rights led to revolutions throughout South America. South American nations gained their independence because of the leadership of two Creole generals in particular. From 1811 to 1824, Venezuelan Creole Simón Bolívar led an army of revolutionaries against Spain. Bolívar helped to create the new nations of Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and Bolivia. Simón Bolívar lived from 1783 to 1830. And he was called Libertador, liberator. Bolivar was a brilliant general, visionary, a writer, and a fighter. He's called the George Washington of South America. Bolivar planned to unite the Spanish colonies of South America into a single country called Gran Colombia. And the area of Upper Peru was renamed Bolivia in his honor. Discouraged by political disputes that tore the new Latin American nations apart, he's reported to have said, "America is ungovernable. Those who have served the revolution have plowed the sea." Argentinian Creole José de San Martin led the independence movement in southern South America. San Martin helped create the new nations of Argentina, Chile, and Peru. José de San Martin lived from 1778 to 1850. Unlike the dashing Bolivar, San Martin was a modest man. Though born in Argentina, he spent much of his youth in Spain as a career military officer. He fought with Spanish forces against Napoleon. He returned to Latin America to be part of its liberation from Spain. Fighting for 10 years, he became the liberator of Argentina, Chile, and Peru. Like Bolivar, discouraged by political infighting, San Martin sailed for Europe. He died, almost forgotten, on French soil in 1850. Unlike the Creoles in South America, it was the Indians and the mestizos who played the leading role of independence in Mexico. In 1810, a poor but well-educated Catholic priest named Father Miguel Hidalgo used Enlightenment ideals to call for revolution against Spain. Father Hidalgo led an army of 80,000 Indian and mestizo revolutionaries against the Spanish military and the Creoles, who feared losing their wealth. During the rebellion, Father Hidalgo was killed, but Mexicans found new leaders to continue the fight for another 10 years. The turning point in the war came in 1820 when the Creoles switched sides and joined the Indian and mestizo revolt against Spain. In 1821, Spain granted Mexico its independence and a republic was formed. Throughout Latin America, new democratic republics were created. But Latin Americans did not have a history of self-government, and many of these new governments were unstable. In many nations, military dictators called caudillos seized power and made few reforms for citizens. Because of all this, Latin America became overly dependent on the USA.